Good morning, Chris.
Hey Richard, good morning. How was the week?
I had a really good week. Yeah, lots of productive conversations, lots of interesting things going on. Speaking to a lot of product leaders, design leaders. As you know, the area that you and I probably most interested in is how does the stuff that we talk about, the technologies and the advancements, how does it affect the creative work that gets done? And so, yeah, just a lot of really good, interesting conversations about how that's happening and how companies are organizing around these new technologies and these new realities, or not,
Excellent.
in some cases.
Exactly. It's been an exciting week for me. So much happening in the space with AI. So many good conversations that are starting to crop up. We had some video recordings with interviews with Sam Altman. We had a segment on 60 Minutes with Jensen Huang and NVIDIA. And we saw some big updates this week. So I'm excited
Yeah,
about our conversation. We have a lot to share with the listeners.
yeah, we do. As a reminder to listeners, if you're a first-time listener, we publish all the stories of the week throughout the week. There are probably anything from 8 to 10 stories a day on Maginative.com. You can get a summary or an update, like a weekly review of all those stories at the end of the week if you subscribe. There is a paid level as well if you want to have an in-depth analysis with those stories. And then Chris and I are going to be talking about the stories of the week in depth. In other words, we're going to be doing analysis. So what you're tuning into right now is a weekly analysis of what's going on and the application of these tools and these technologies to the work that folks do on a day-to-day basis. Why don't we start with China? I think that's an interesting place to start. Some big updates coming from China, some investment, something worth talking about.
Yeah, I think it's great to kind of see what's happening on the other side of the fence. A lot of times we focus on a lot of the models and the technologies happening in the US and in a lot of the Western countries and not paying too close of an attention to China. And so last weekend they had and I'm going to completely butcher this name, but it's called the Zhengguankun Forum. And it was basically their forum where they showcased their latest innovations in AI and robotics. And two announcements really stood out that had a lot of people have been paying attention to. One was this new video model called Vidu that basically mimics Sora. It's a completely different architecture, so it's not diffusion transformers, but they showed a demo that basically copied a lot of the technologies that we're seeing with Sora. And so with everybody being so amazed with the breakthrough that you're seeing here with Sora, you're now seeing that already available in the Chinese market. And the second was this announcement of a robot. And this is an all electric robot, much like the one that was unveiled last week by Boston Dynamics. And they showed it running. It's able to run,
Really?
I think, for up to six
I did.
seconds straight. And at a consistent pace, it's able to navigate different terrain. So, overall, just really good updates coming out of China. And it kind of raises the question as to this Cold War that we're seeing between the US and China, right? The US is seemingly very adamant that they want to ensure that a lot of the advanced chips aren't getting into China. And so they're restricting access to NVIDIA's chips and from other companies. What are your thoughts on what we're seeing from China, Richard?
We spoke about this a little bit last week, but I've had some more time to think about it. My original feeling was that making China the de facto enemy of AI right now kind of works for the current political narrative, which is we're going
Mm.
to reinvest in infrastructure. I'm really excited about the infrastructure bill and all the changes that's coming down the line. Specifically, we mentioned one particular case where the construction of harbor cranes, these are the cranes that are lifting containers off of ships onto the land. These have technology built into them. They are almost entirely built in China. And so
Hmm.
there's a serious concern, a security concern, that the technology that's literally tracking everything that's coming into the States could find its way back to China. So the infrastructure bill has suggested, and I think it is going to enforce this idea that those types of technologies where there is both an infrastructure and a security play will now return to local US manufacturers. And I think that's interesting. I'm not 100% sure that the China as the AI enemy is a narrative that is it doesn't feel to me like it needs to be that way. It feels slightly more like it needs to be. Yeah, we're advancing these technologies. We're making investments in our country. We believe in our people. We believe in the talent and the brains that we have on U.S. soil, and we're going to create an environment in which it's more attractive for those people and others to come here to do that work. I'm not sure the Cold War narrative is necessary, although it certainly will work for some part of the population. So, again, revealing myself as probably a more liberal thinker than a conservative thinker on the political issues. Again, I don't really feel the necessity for us to, for our government to place China in that box of, look, this is the enemy, this is the new Cold War. And yes, there are some security risks, but I don't see it being played out right now in AI. I just kind of think it's more narrative than reality.
Well, let me ask you this, Richard. Do you think this positioning helps to spur innovation within the country? Like similarly with the development of the atomic bomb, when you had a villain that you could put up against and say, "Hey, let's drive growth." Is it necessary to have a villain, whether it's real or perceived, to
Yeah.
just accelerate growth and innovation within the spaces that we want?
Human beings are storytellers. So the short answer would be yes. We want to hear stories. We want to believe in stories. Stories are the medium by which messages and signals are transferred. So the short answer would be yes. The longer story would be, is that the only story? Are there other stories that could be just as valid? The villain story is powerful and certainly, as you say, motivating in some cases. And there have been some significant defense level investments because of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what our country also needs to hear right now is that there is, because of this AI, robotics, etc., technology revolution, there is a massive opportunity to shift some of the money and infrastructure and training to blue collar jobs. I would
Mm-hmm.
love to see that. I'd love to see a lot more trades coming to bear on this story. We've got a significant energy crisis
Yeah.
looming. I'd love to see more, people manufacturing, people making stuff, people using their hands, electricians, engineers who are mechanically building stuff that we need to power this revolution. As you know, one of our friends, Nick Walkinshaw, has started a company called Taurus. Taurus is essentially building a technology which allows every single home and every single business to have their own power plant. So it sources the power from generally solar or some other renewable source. It then stores it in a mechanical battery, which is like a flywheel, and
Mm-hmm.
then releases that energy either to that home or that business or back into the grid where it's needed. And the idea, uh, this is kind of an ecological principle, is that instead of having one big unit of power, you distribute it. So it's the beehive versus the elephant concept. There is a lot more security in that. We've seen that with the infrastructure of the internet.
Mm-hmm.
The more you divide and conquer, the easier it is to preserve that thing that you're creating. It's also much easier to build it because you're just replacing and maintain it. And I'll talk about maintenance in a second, because that's a big part of that skill level stuff. But what we're doing right now is we're shifting our attention to this new AI technology without having the real conversation about, well, what's that going to require in terms of skills to support that and maintain that? As you know, because you've been living in the States long enough, infrastructure is a major
Yeah.
concern. If you don't
Yeah.
have people there to both install and maintain that, you ultimately lead yourself into a crisis. Bridges falling down. We've seen that. We've seen roads crumbling. We've seen cities having significant problems, especially with water advancing as it has and climate's changing. So I think what I'm mostly interested in this narrative is not so much the villain narrative, but much more in the local narrative of, wow, look at all these great opportunities. There are significant opportunities for kids coming out of high school to get really well-paying blue-collar jobs, building the infrastructure, maintaining the infrastructure. This is where I see the hugest opportunity for VC and PE and institutional level investments is in that part of it, and not so much in the chips and stuff like that, because those are necessary, but it's just a tiny, tiny, tiny part of it. Like
Mm.
there's a very, very small group of people that are going to be working on chips, but there are many, many more in terms of just the size of the population that's needed to build and maintain these things, like the fabrications, like the infrastructure. All of that stuff has to be built and maintained by people, and that is the biggest story in my mind. If I was an investor right now, I'd be writing checks for solutions like Taurus, this Nate Walkenshaw's company, or something like that, because I think that that's the unvalued asset here. Where if you're buying, say, Nvidia, you probably missed your boat. You should have bought Nvidia a few years ago.
Yeah,
It's like you're going to be overpaying for Nvidia today. You're going to be overpaying for Microsoft today, but you probably won't be overpaying for infrastructure today, because I think that's the unvalued asset here.
but let's kind of tug on that string, because I think when we just even touch on the two areas that we covered just now, robotics and AI, ultimately, a lot of the robots that we're seeing in development are humanoid robots. You're seeing Sanctuary AI and Microsoft partner to advanced robotic research. And ultimately, we know that a lot of these robots are going to be put to work in manufacturing and in a lot of these infrastructure jobs that you're talking about. Let's broaden the conversation about
Yes.
the possibilities of AI, because I listened to Sam Altman at the Stanford Forum this week, where he discussed a wide range of topics. He spoke about the investments that they're looking to put into AI. He spoke about the opportunities, spoke about startups. But in your mind, let's talk a little bit about where society falls when you start to invest in these robots, where a lot of these jobs may be replaced by robots, and AI ultimately will bring more opportunity, but it's also going to take away a lot of options off the table for blue collar workers.
History has proven that that's never the case. So new technologies actually create more jobs than they take away. Yes, there will be a change in the sense that some jobs that currently exist will no longer exist. My sense and my feeling is those jobs will be white collar jobs. I have a strong sense, because I'm old and I've been around the block a few times, that the jobs that will be lost will not be the blue collar jobs. It'll be the white collar jobs. The
Yeah.
people that currently have bullshit jobs, as David Graeber wrote in his beautiful essay and following book about these bullshit jobs, where people can't even describe their job to their mothers. They don't know what they do. They don't understand how they do their jobs. They are data entry. They're doing all kinds of menial marketing, mid-level management stuff that's really just pushing paperwork in a digital format. Those are the jobs at risk, in my mind.
Yeah.
I think for blue collar, well, who's going to build the factories that build the robots? Who's going to make the things that make the things? And I think that that's actually significant. Like I said, that's not the only part of the story. That like 10% is the making. The other 90% is the maintenance. Who's going to show up at your house and fix the things? Who's going to be the person who picks up the robot in the truck that brings the robot back to the facility to be maintained or updated or upgraded? I think what we've seen with any new technology in any time frame, going back to just turning on electricity for the first time, is that the real thing is the maintenance. It's the keeping the lights on, and that is a blue collar job. That is somebody in a truck with a flip phone going out and doing the work that needs to be done. It's not the blue. It's not the white collar middle manager who is pushing content into another social media platform. So I think if we look at history and look at what hasn't changed versus what will change, then I'm much more on the side of history where we say, well, look, more is going to stay the same than it's going to be different. And I actually, as much as I, not a fan of just parroting what billionaires say, Jeff Bezos has had some really interesting things to say about this in the past. And that is, if we look at what doesn't change, if we look at what stays the same, we look at what people value, then that's a much easier investment to make than in speculating what is going to change. I don't want to be Sam Altman and speculate what's going to change. I don't want to be pretending that I know what's going to happen in the future, because we have a really good history of being wrong almost all the time when it comes to that. we conveniently forget that these pundits are wrong. But what doesn't change is people's desire for security, for safety, for good quality stuff, for stuff that's reliable. And they want the things that they buy to work. I mean, they don't want to buy stuff that doesn't work. They don't want to buy headsets that don't work or robots that don't work. They want stuff that is reliable and convenient, and is well maintained. And that's a blue collar work. That's definitely not white collar work.
I agree with you to a large extent, but
Wow.
I need to kind of put my context around it. There's a quote that Sam said, and I'm going to read it directly. He said, "Whether we burn $500 million a year or 5 billion or $50 billion a year, I don't care. I genuinely don't. As long as we can stay on a trajectory where we eventually create more value for society than that, and as long as we can figure out a way to pay the bills, we're making AGI. It's going to be expensive, but it's totally worth it." And I heard him say that, and so many different emotions ran through me. But as I listened to you talk just now, what I will agree with is I think the opportunity in the short term, in the next maybe 5, 10, maybe even 20 years, will be for blue collar jobs and around a lot of the work involved with development and maintenance. And so when I hear a lot of the conversations around AI, especially coming out of Silicon Valley, it always feels like they're talking so far into the future that they miss the obvious right here and now that will affect people. And so I do think, yes, ultimately one day will you have robots that will do the repairs and do the maintenance and AI that is super intelligent enough to solve a lot of our problems? Sure. But is it going to happen right away? I don't think so. I think it will, to your point, it's going to take time for us to have the infrastructure in place. It's going to take time for us to adapt to these systems and to trust them. And so I do think when I hear numbers being thrown around in the AI space today like they are, it almost feels irresponsible. It feels careless given all the poverty that we and inequality that we still see rampant in our society. It feels like a lot of the conversations, a lot of the narratives that we're seeing is geared towards us focusing on this far out dream, which again, I think that long-term planning is important, but we do need to keep our eyes still focused on today and
Yeah.
how we can apply technologies and resources to solve the problems that we still have in the world today.
Yeah. What the quote that you read, Sam Altman's quote, really does sound like a billionaire's privilege, right?
Mm,
I don't care how much money we have to spend on this, but we're going to get there.
yeah.
I think if you're somebody on the poverty line, if you are living in a food desert, if you are financially insecure and you don't know when your rent, if you're going to make rent this month, which is basically a significant part of our population, I think,
Yeah.
More than 50% of the US population is just a few months away from some financial crisis. They don't have savings. They're over their head in terms of debt. Um, I think that's very tone deaf of
Hmm.
Sam. I think
Hmm.
he needs to be a little bit more, maybe step out of the bubble of Silicon Valley and go for a walk around some of the neighborhoods not too far from him,
Yeah.
and just see what's going on. And yes, I'm a tech optimist in the sense that I'd like to see these things be created. I'd like to see where they can take us. The other point I want to make is I'm not sure it's necessary to conflate AI and robotics. Now, they
Mm.
are using similar technologies, and robots certainly benefit from having a level of AI in them. But robots are robots. Let's be
Mhm.
clear. Robots have been around for a while. Even back in the days when I ran Fresh Till Soil, we had robotics companies. We did a lot of work for a robotics company. This is 10, 15 years ago. Robots are not new. Factories are almost entirely filled with robots these days. The robotic revolution that we're talking about isn't the robotic revolution that's going to take jobs away from factories. That's already happened. That transition has already happened. What we're talking about is personal robots that are operating in your home or in an environment in which they are a little bit more tangible to the individual. In other words, we see them, we may be passing a package to them or asking them to do something for us. But the work that's being done in factories to build cars, to build airplane engines and all kinds of things, these are significantly factories powered by robotics already. We've already
Mhm.
seen that B2B or that commercial revolution. And that's where the billions or trillions of dollars worth of blue collar investments are already, we've seen that shift already happen. Um, so I think, again, it's a little bit tone deaf to talk about robots as if they were going to replace everybody's job. But really, I don't see any robot being able to do the kinds of things that the average human does right now. Um, Running for 6 seconds doesn't help me at all. Um, Being tethered to some electrical power source doesn't help me at all. Like a lot of these things, I mean, honestly, if I was to have a helper right now to come do some yard work with me, this person needs to work for, or this robot needs to work for a significant length of time without any supervision, without any training. And right now, I just don't see why I would make a 50, 60, $70,000 investment in a robot when I can have somebody who knows that job, can show up tomorrow and do the work. So as you say, yes, there is a future where this happens, 100%. It's undeniable. But we have a reality happening right now
Yeah.
in an election year where this level of conversation about spending $50 billion on a technology that's not going to actually help anybody right now, it's not going to influence anybody's life right now in a positive way. That's a level of tone deafness that we have to be aware of. Don't have to necessarily judge Sam. I think he's doing a great job running the company, but I think we have to be aware that we've heard this before. We've heard the crypto experts, we've heard the internet experts in the past claim that their technology is going to revolutionize and save everything. And really all it does is it fills our cupboards full of appliances.
The rest of the conversation, by the way, if you haven't had a chance to watch it, I highly encourage you to just take some time to watch it. He covers what he thinks needs to be a co-creation of AI with society,
Yeah.
gradually rolling out the technology rather than building AI in a basement and then just releasing AGI on society one day. But taking the time to ensure that we're educating the population about the technology, that we're developing regulation and governance around how it should be integrated into our society. So overall, a great conversation, a lot of questions from the audience, but I wrote a response to that conversation on Maginative.com. If you also want
Yeah.
some more details about our analysis of it, definitely check out that article.
I love that article. One thing I want to just close out on is, I speak to product leaders, design leaders, engineering leaders almost every day. And one of the things that we've learned over the decades of having these conversations is that no good thing can happen from building in the darkness,
Mhm.
as you said, in the basement. I can tell you so many stories, so many anecdotes of leaders who've said, look, what we're going to do is we're going to create this new thing. We're going to release this new application, this platform, and we're going to do it all quietly in the background, in darkness, in secret, stealth project, whatever you want to call it. And without doubt, that thing has failed.
Yep.
There is no replacing the benefits from building in daylight, from
Yep.
taking the thing out of the basement and showing to everybody and saying, this is what we're creating. This is what's happening. Take a good look at it. Let's bring all the different voices. Let's bring the poets and the artists and the musicians and the people who have different perspectives on this to look at it from angles we haven't seen before. That daylight
Love that.
allows us to sanitize these things, both ethically, morally, and also technologically, in a way that cannot be replaced. I as somebody who speaks to these leaders, and I'm talking about Fortune 50, Fortune 10 companies every single day,
Yeah.
I can tell you that every project that was built in secret has failed. There is not a good track record for these things. These things have to be built in daylight for them to really blossom, to overuse that metaphor.
I completely agree. All right. I wanted to switch gears, Richard, to talk a little bit about AI and society, especially concerning the news media. But before I do, I just want to highlight a couple quick updates that happened this week for businesses and also for consumers that our listeners might want to be aware of. I'll start with the business updates. So this week, Microsoft unveiled Copilot Workspace. It's basically a developer environment that is fully AI native and it automates a lot of the development and code writing, bug processing that you'd have when you're building software. And it's different from like their Copilot chat or their code completion because it's
Yeah.
actually agentic. It can go and do things. And so that's really cool from them. Amazon also released some updates. Their Amazon Q is now generally available, and that's their chatbot slash AI assistant. They also have Amazon Q Developer, Amazon Q Business, and these are all geared at providing services for businesses that are interested in taking advantage of the AI opportunity today. You can explore what they have to offer. Anthropic, this is one I'm excited about. They announced a new mobile app for the iPhone and the iPad, and I'll tell you, it's amazing. I love Anthropic. I love their models. I think a lot of businesses are finding it to be a worthy alternative to GPT-4, sometimes even a better alternative to it. And they also announced a business plan for teams. And so if you have a team of 5 or more, you can subscribe to the team plan and you'll have a much bigger window to add documents and files. And so you can have your AI control a lot more. And then finally, OpenAI announced their new memory feature is now available. And it's interesting because it's only available to paid individual ChatGPT accounts. If you have a team or an enterprise account, it's not yet available, which feels a little bit backwards. But memory basically allows you to give the AI assistant information that you want it to remember across conversations. And so maybe there are certain business requirements or certain guidelines that you want the assistant to always remember. You're now able to have it committed to memory. You're able to commit entire conversations to memory. And so I think that will help in just the advancement of how we interact with these models. So overall, a week full of fun updates for both consumers and
Yeah.
businesses that I think people will love.
Chris, before you move on, I'm curious. I actually started using the memory feature this week. Can you explain maybe how the average person would benefit from their chatbot having memory?
Sure. So it's actually really cool. If you think of how AI assistants have worked so
Yeah.
far, they're really good at working with the data that you put in front of them right now in the moment,
Boom.
right? And what memory does, for example, let's say you have a dog. You could have the AI assistant know that you have a dog, the dog's name, the breed of the dog. And so when you're having conversations, you don't need to constantly remind it, I have a
Really?
dog and this is my dog. You're able to just reference your dog. Or if you have certain requirements for how you want to write, a certain writing style or a format that you'd
Yeah.
want to present your work in, these are things that you can commit to memory. And so if you're a freelancer and you're looking to have AI synthesize information and present it to you in a certain way, you can provide that to the model as memory. And when you ask it for that information, it will always do it in that context. You can also have it forget things, right? And so
Oh, really?
as we're thinking about these new features, we start to think through.
I get that from my brain as well because it's something I deprogram
I
myself.
know, right? Like
Yeah.
forget this.
Yeah.
But it's actually an interesting problem to solve for because just like you want to commit certain conversations to memory, you don't necessarily want your AI remembering everything that you have
Right.
put it through. And
Yeah.
especially within the business context, you want to have private conversations. And so those are all features that you're starting to see OpenAI
Got it.
invest in: temporary chats, memory, and these are a couple steps ahead of even some of the other lead-in chatbots like Gemini and Anthropic, where they're still just at that initial phase of interaction. OpenAI is starting to think through how they can bring their models to the next level of engagement and experience.
Yeah.
And you can imagine what this looks like if you want to get a meeting recap and you want it to be
Right.
done in a very specific format. You can now just ask the model and it will remember those instructions that were provided to it.
Yeah. I'm actually one of the companies that I'm working with, a company called Crystal. They started out as essentially a personality test that you could use. You could put the plugin into your browser and it would be able to tell you, hey, you're about to have a conversation with Chris.
Mhm.
These are the personality things that you should know about Chris. For instance, keep your conversation short, to the
Mhm.
point, be direct, those kinds of things, or be casual, and it would give you some guidance as to how to do that. The next generation that we're talking about as we kind of lean into AI at Crystal is thinking a little bit about how can Crystal then become your partner in developing relationships. So the anchor, of course, is the meeting. We often think about our meeting as the way in which we connect to people on a regular basis. But the relationship is the continuum that,
Hmm.
anchor is supporting. And so we're thinking, and have got some really interesting products in development right now where we are using a combination of manual and AI research, kind of like a perplexity type
Yeah,
research, where
yeah.
we would look at what data is available on that person, bubble it up into the meeting calendar. So the calendar invite would actually have that personality data in there, build a report or a dossier to show how that actually would benefit you asymmetrically in a meeting. Like, hey, I know more about you than you know about me, Chris. If I'm in the
I've done my
sales or
research,
deal
right?
situation, that might actually benefit me, and ultimately get to a point where we can then use that memory aspect of an LLM to continue to build on that, saying, well, in the past, you've had these kinds of conversations, and this is what those outcomes were. Maybe you want to tweak it here and there. Um, look, like we've said in the past, these things are not like going to solve all the problems, but we're starting to see some real evidence that the asymmetrical advantage of having increased confidence in your attempt to build relationships or maintain relationships is certainly something that's really important for both business people and also relationships in general.
I love that because I'm also thinking of onboarding. And when you have a new person join a team, how can you lower the barrier to entry to get them to start working,
Yes.
right? To onboard them into new relationships with
Yep.
clients and to be able to say, hey, this is the history that we have had with a client. And you're able to just bring them up to speed very quickly. I think it's brilliant.
Cool. Should we shift our attention to the AI in society?
I think so. I think there are some interesting conversations, especially around AI and news media, that I want us to talk about. So this week, basically, 8 new newspapers in the US are suing OpenAI and Microsoft. It's not the first time we're seeing this. It's likely not going to be the last. We're also seeing deals being struck. OpenAI and the Financial Times have announced a new licensing deal for their historical content and also for training models. I imagine that that's what other newspapers are really gunning for. They're thinking, hey, we're seeing some of these multi-million dollar, multi-billion dollar deals. We want a piece of that action also. But we're also seeing an interesting approach from X, formerly Twitter. They're going to be using XAI's Grok model to summarize conversations that are happening around the news. And so this is interesting because one, it's bringing in more voices to the news versus just, hey, this is a source and I'm going to summarize this and provide it to you and not credit or give any sort of compensation to the original creator. Here you're seeing the meta conversations that are happening. How are people thinking about it? How are people reacting to it? And they're able to provide a summary and then provide different posts and, of course, the original article. And so you're able to drive traffic back to that original article, but also highlight conversations that are happening around it. It's not a bad idea.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think it's, again, similar to what Perplexity is doing, you know, where Google may have an advantage over certain very short form searches, 1, 2, 3, 4 words. Perplexity definitely thinking about that next layer of search where
Mhm.
it's a much more thoughtful question. It's a deeper question. It's maybe multiple questions in some kind of cascade. Perplexity really feels to me like the search engine I would go to if I had a deeper question. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
this Google is going to give me some, as you said, summary of the stuff that I can already read there. It's helping me maybe by spending 30 seconds less in reading. Perplexity is actually going out and looking for a much better form of an answer. And it's also then linking me to those sources in a way that makes it a lot more useful to me. So not sure if I can draw an exact parallel between what X is doing and what Perplexity is doing, but I think they're all starting to think a little bit about this idea of either a subscription model or a model where it's not just, hey, I'm going to give you the answer, but you're also going to have to put up with all this shitty ad stuff.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
Well, hang on a second. What kind of answer are you looking for? If you want the surface, if you want the fast food level answer, well, there's a version for that. And you're going to have to pay by becoming the product, by being the
Hmm.
thing that we sell advertising to. Or there's something else here for you as well. And that's going to require a subscription. And I think both X and Perplexity are subscription models now. Is that correct?
It is. So this feature is only available to premium users on X. And I've been using it for the last 2 weeks, and it is super helpful. No, it's not always right. But what I appreciate about it is that it surfaces other voices outside of just the mainstream media
Yeah.
saying this is our article. You're able to get commentary. And I think that it encourages conversation. And that may be the advantage that X has over other models, and why you're seeing Gemini and Google trying to get into Reddit and get access to that conversation happening on those platforms. So I think where you have humans talking, where you have humans engaged in conversation, that will be an interesting place for the future of media and media coverage. I do think media will need to change. One approach, certainly, that you're seeing with OpenAI is, hey, let's license this and let's try and have this within our ecosystem. This could be an alternative that people end up loving.
Yeah, the thing, as we talk about society, the thing that is obvious to me as a parent is that we are starting to see a pushback, a counter revolution to the screen.
Mm,
There's some big initiatives at the school level to ban phones, smartphones, and similar devices from the school completely. There's actually can't remember the name of the company, but it sells a pouch that you put your phone in, and it essentially cuts the phone off in
oh,
terms of its ability to receive and transmit. And it's a safe pouch. You kind of get to school, you put it in the pouch, and you're done. It started out as a security device for those kinds of labs and some
mhm,
places where they don't want devices in there. Now schools are rolling this out. We're seeing parent organizations, teacher organizations pushing back on the device use in schools. I think we're going to start even seeing it in organizations saying, hey, you're spending way more time staring at your device than you are doing anything else. We're paying you. This doesn't really have a good kind of, connection with what it is that this arrangement is all about. So what's interesting to me is, will we see, more of a question than an answer, I don't have an answer, is that will we see society leaning into subscription models or paid for models where you are no longer the product? So you're not selling your attention in return for an ad. You are, or should I say, it's attention in return for some information.
mhm.
Um, but you're choosing very deliberately to say, this is the thing that I want. I want this kind of
Yeah.
specific, unadulterated relationship where I can't be pushed to a certain marketing message, or even, as we know, the ability to push certain political messages
Mhm.
or content that isn't necessarily an ad, but it is a form of marketing in the sense that it is propaganda. It is pushing you into a certain direction. So, yeah, hearing more and more from similar aged, parents and folks that are just generally worried about screen use and screen time.
Yeah.
In hey, we should be thinking about alternatives. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not sure, but it feels to me like having an app that's dedicated to doing a certain thing versus just giving up your attention, that feels a lot more interesting for that type of future.
Well, let me ask you this then, Richard. There is one other story flew under the radar. And in this case, in the Ukraine, their foreign ministry has appointed an AI spokesperson for consular
Beautiful.
services. And so this is the first official AI model. It's called Victoria She, and it's based on a real person's like image. However, it's all AI generated, and it
Yeah.
will provide updates on the war efforts, on consular activities,
Which
and so now we're really reaching into this interesting space. Would you be comfortable getting your official news information from the government from an AI? Now, what they've done, they've said, hey, we're going to provide a QR code. You can scan the code and you'll get a transcript of the official written news. So if you want to just kind of cross reference or verify that this is an official source, you'll see the official content there. But for people that want maybe the convenience of just listening to an AI just telling you what's happening, you're not going to have this option. Is this the future? Are we going to start seeing more AI anchors delivering the news? What do you think?
In the past, you and I have spoken a lot about the idea that the next wave of technology, the next wave of whatever innovation is going to happen is really an extension of what we believe to be our human powers. So these are
Hmm.
our senses or our intuitions that we have developed as being humans. Primary amongst that is our ability to develop relationships with other humans. In fact, I would say that amongst all the other living species on this planet, this is the thing that really sets us apart, is that we are incredibly good at both starting and maintaining relationships that have some mutually
Hmm.
beneficial equation associated with that. Like, hey, I can help you. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. I'll specify. I specialize in this thing. You specialize in that thing. Together, we'll create a crazy civilization. Um, I think really this is part of that, is that anthropomorphic version of what we're seeing in technology is a necessary part of being human. Like, we're
Hmm.
more likely to respond to a an anchor that looks and sounds and emotes the way that we do than a robotic voice that certainly an uncanny valley will impact our belief in
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
credibility or whatever. So I think there's something there. Um, as you was telling the story, I was having a gut reaction to that as well. I was like, okay. I mean, I don't know if that's worse than a real anchor. I mean, I've seen I haven't watched the news television since 1985, so I'm not a particularly good uh, useful source of anchor knowledge. But when I do see them pop up on in their farcical forms, I do wonder whether they are any better than what we could create with AI.
Quite damning, but I love it. All right, so we are running out of time, so we need to wrap up. A couple of other stories that I think you can jump over on the site to check out. Microsoft released their first annual responsible AI transparency report. Definitely worth looking into, just seeing the extent to which companies like Microsoft are going to develop responsible and safe AI. You're seeing the NIST in the US launch a program to evaluate and measure synthetic media. So, how can we better detect and determine whether something is AI generated or not? And so, just a lot happening, obviously, at this intersection of this groundbreaking technology and where it fits into our society that we need to explore more. So wrapping up as usual, let's talk about money. We're
Yep.
seeing more startups as usual get funding. We have funding for CoreWeave, and they rent GPUs out. They have a $1.1 billion Series C investment.
Mhm.
They're also backed by Nvidia. And that's one thing that I don't think people appreciate, just how many companies are being funded and backed by Nvidia.
We did mention last week that Microsoft's investments in startups has far exceeded all the combined investments of VC. So NVIDIA, Microsoft, Anthropic, we're going to see a lot more spin-offs. I actually think this is a business model of the future, is the spin-off model, the corporate spin-off model.
Mm,
I think it's a healthier place than just giving a bunch of money to a bunch of crazy people who've never done it before. I'd much rather see a leader from Anthropic, a leader from Google, or from Microsoft say, hey, I've got a better idea and I'd like to go and do this somewhere else. Or, hey, we've been doing this in the lab for a while. It's not really a core to this existing company. We should probably take it out and go and do it somewhere else. I really like that. If I had an investment fund, that's what I would invest in.
yeah. And speaking of Microsoft, Satya is doing a Southeast Asia tour. But if you kind of zoom out and look at their actions over the last month, this week alone, they have announced investments in Malaysia and in Indonesia. And these are some of the largest investments in these countries. I think $1.7 billion in Indonesia, 2.2 in Malaysia. They have announced a new data center in Thailand. They have announced partnerships in Japan. Of course, they just got back from the Middle East where they're announcing that new partnership with the Abu Dhabi
Yes.
AI company. And so you're seeing where they're committing a lot of money and resources to these regions. Obviously, they have a mutual interest in being the company providing the infrastructure and the AI models for these countries. But they're talking about upskilling and training a lot of people to learn about AI, to learn how to leverage these models for future jobs. And I
Yeah.
think that's really key and critical. I think we it's good to be having more conversations like this and to see these big tech companies actually commit to investing in not just the infrastructure but also the people and ensuring that they're
Yeah.
taking them along for the journey.
Yeah, for sure.
Those are the key stories that we have time to touch on today. There are so many stories that you'll get a chance to check out on the website, so many videos that we shared. So definitely hop on over to Maginative.com. We're going to be sending out our weekly newsletter soon. And so if you just want a quick digest in your inbox that you can get an update with all the top stories, you'll be able to get that by subscribing. There is a paid subscription. If you do that, one, it will support us, but also you'll be able to help push the work that we're doing for AI literacy forward. And then finally, subscribe on YouTube. We're putting out podcasts and interviews and conversations that we think are worth having to the community. So we hope you enjoy them.
Good. Well, I have one last thing to add, and that is go and watch the original 1999 Matrix movie. Um, but it's foretold so much of what's happening now. I can't even. I watched it again this week, and I was like, wow, the the accuracy of this is just so amazing. So yeah, go back and watch the Matrix. You'll really love it through new eyes.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us. Until next week, have a fantastic weekend and one love.